Welcome to Project Dreadnest, where the files they tried to burn still speak, and what they buried refuses to stay dead. Project Dreadnest, Case File 7732. Subject: Wildland Killings, Montana Interior. Status: Suppressed. Clearance Omega Black required. Begin file. I wasn't out there looking for anything unusual. I was looking for elk. Season had just opened, and I was trying to fill my tag early, before the weather turned. The forecast called for an early snow, the kind that drives everything down from the high country and makes hunting impossible for weeks. I've hunted alone for over 20 years. Started when I was 16 with my father's old Winchester. Learned the hard way that the mountains don't forgive mistakes. I know these woods like the lines in my palm. Every ridge, every creek bed, every stand of timber where the big bulls hide when pressure mounts. The hills roll deep, the pine gets tight, but I know every sound the wind makes out there. I know what silence is supposed to feel like. And what I felt that morning wasn't silence. It was something else. Something watching. My truck was parked at the end of Forest Service Road 247, about as far as you can drive before the wilderness boundary kicks in. I'd been planning this hunt for months, studying topographic maps, marking water sources and game trails. The area I was heading into was designated roadless wilderness, the kind of country where you don't see another soul for days. Perfect elk habitat, but unforgiving terrain. I packed light but smart. 3 days of food, water purification tablets, emergency shelter, first aid kit, and enough ammunition to handle anything I might encounter. The forecast was clear for the next 48 hours. Then a storm system was supposed to move in from the northwest. I started hiking before dawn, headlamp cutting through the darkness as I followed an old game trail that switchbacked up the mountain face. The trail was barely visible, probably made by generations of elk moving between feeding and bedding areas. My boots found purchase on loose shale and pine needles, the familiar weight of my pack settling into the rhythm of steady climbing. By sunrise, I was 3 miles in and gaining elevation fast. The first few hours were routine. I saw fresh elk sign everywhere. Rubs on aspen trees, wallows near seeps, tracks pressed deep in mud around a hidden spring. A kind of sign that makes a hunter's heart race. I was moving through prime habitat, the kind of country where trophy bulls live their entire lives without seeing humans. As the sun climbed higher, I shed layers, working up a steady sweat as the trail climbed toward a series of ridges that would give me a commanding view of the valley below. By midday, I was 12 miles from the truck, way off the marked trails, up where the game moves when they're pressured by hunters closer to the roads. The country up here was different. Older somehow. The trees grew larger, the silence deeper. I found a good spot to set up camp under a ridge that would block the wind and give me shelter if the weather turned. The location was perfect. Water nearby, commanding views, and thick timber to break up my outline. I spent the afternoon glassing the valley below, watching for movement in the meadows and clearings where elk might be feeding. A country spread out before me like a green and gold carpet, unmarked by roads or buildings. It was the kind of place that reminded you how small you really are, how the wilderness existed long before humans and would continue long after we're gone. I saw a few mule deer, a red-tailed hawk circling thermals, but no elk. That was normal. The big bulls were smart, moving mostly at dawn and dusk, staying in the thick timber during daylight hours. As evening approached, I made a cold camp. No fire, no unnecessary noise. The temperature was dropping fast, and I could smell weather coming in despite the clear forecast. The wind had shifted to the northwest, carrying the scent of distant snow. I ate a quick meal of energy bars and jerky, washed down with water from my bottles. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional call of a loon from a hidden lake somewhere in the valley below. That's when I first noticed something was wrong. The silence wasn't natural. In 20 years of hunting these mountains, I'd learned to read the language of the wilderness. There should have been night sounds, owls calling, mice rustling in the underbrush, the distant yip of coyotes. But there was nothing. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the forest was holding its breath. I zipped myself into my sleeping bag with my rifle beside me, a round chambered and the safety on. It was a habit I'd developed over the years, sleeping armed in country where grizzly bears and mountain lions hunted at night. But tonight, the weight of the rifle felt different, more necessary. I lay there listening to the silence, every nerve on edge. The darkness seemed thicker than usual, pressing against my tent walls like something alive. My watch showed 2:17 a.m. when I woke to the smell. Something like old meat left in the sun. But it was October, the temperature was dropping toward freezing, and nothing should have been rotting in this cold. The smell was wrong in other ways too, carrying undertones of something else. Something that made my stomach clench and my skin crawl. I'd smelled death before, found winter-killed deer and elk, but this was different. Older, sicker. I stayed in my tent, rifle ready, controlling my breathing. The smell seemed to be moving around the camp, circling. I strained to hear footsteps, the snap of a twig, anything that might tell me what was out there. But there was nothing. Not even the normal sounds of night creatures. The forest had gone completely silent, as if every living thing was hiding. The smell lingered for what felt like hours, and gradually faded. I dozed fitfully until dawn, jerking awake at every small sound. When the first gray light began to filter through the tent walls, I unzipped the door and stepped outside. That's when I found the tracks. They started at the edge of my camp, maybe 10 feet from my tent. At first glance, they looked almost human, but wrong. The prints were larger than any man's foot, maybe 14 inches long, with elongated toes that ended in rounded tips. No claws. No arch, just flat, wide prints pressed deep into the soft earth around my campsite. I knelt beside the clearest track, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The depth was wrong. Whatever made these prints was heavy, much heavier than the size suggested. And the stride was wrong too. Too long for normal bipedal movement. The tracks circled my tent not once, but 3 times, each circuit getting closer. I should have left. Every instinct screamed at me to pack up and hike out, but I didn't. I couldn't. 20 years of hunting had taught me to trust my skills, to push deeper into country where other hunters wouldn't go. I convinced myself it was a hoax, someone playing games with a lone hunter. Maybe college kids from Missoula with too much time and creativity. The tracks could have been made with carved wooden feet, the smell from a stink bomb or rotting meat carried in a bag. But even as I rationalized what I had found, a deeper part of my brain was screaming warnings. This wasn't a prank. This was something else. I broke camp quickly, stuffing gear into my pack without my usual care. The plan was to move higher, away from whatever had visited me in the night. The elk were up there anyway, in the high basins where they felt safe from predators. I would hunt for a few hours, then make my way back to the truck. The trail climbed steadily through thick timber, switchbacking up steep slopes covered in deadfall and loose rock. I moved carefully, testing each step, my eyes constantly scanning for movement. The normal sounds of the forest were returning as I gained distance from my campsite. Birds called from the canopy. A chipmunk chattered from a fallen log. The wind rustled through pine needles with a sound like whispered conversations. By noon, I was following a game trail toward what my map showed as an old creek bed. The country up here was different from the valleys below. The trees were older, some of them massive ponderosa pines that must have been growing when Lewis and Clark crossed the continent. The understory was more open, carpeted with pine needles and scattered boulders. It was the kind of place where elk would bed during the day, hidden from view, but with multiple escape routes. I was following a well-used game trail when I saw the clearing ahead. At first, I thought it was natural, maybe a meadow or an old burned scar. But as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The trees didn't fade gradually into open space. They just stopped, abruptly, like someone had drawn a line and said trees could grow no further. I approached the edge carefully, using a large pine for cover. What I saw made my blood freeze. The clearing was roughly circular, maybe 100 yards across. Every tree within that circle had been broken off at the base, not cut or burned, but snapped like twigs. The broken trunks were all twisted in the same direction, as if something massive had moved through the forest in a straight line, sweeping everything aside. The destruction was complete, but strangely organized, too uniform to be natural. In the center of the clearing was a hole. I don't mean a pit or a cave entrance. I mean a hole. Like the ground had rotted open from below. It was roughly circular, maybe 8 feet across, ringed with stones that looked ancient and water-worn. The stones were arranged too perfectly to be natural, fitted together like the work of master masons. But there was no mortar, no tool marks, just smooth granite blocks that seemed to have been shaped by forces I couldn't understand. Around the hole were bones, not scattered randomly like you'd find at a predator kill site. These were arranged, organized, piled in neat cairns that formed a rough circle around the stone ring. Some were obviously animal bones, elk and deer mostly, but others were different. Longer, shaped wrong, and some were clearly human. I counted at least 12 skulls, bleached white by sun and weather. Some looked fresh, others ancient. They were placed at regular intervals around the hole, all facing inward, as if watching something in the depths below. My rifle felt heavy in my hands as I approached the edge. Every instinct told me to turn and run, but I couldn't. I had to see, had to understand what I was looking at. The hole was deep. The sides were smooth stone, perfectly circular, disappearing into darkness beyond the reach of daylight. I could smell something rising from the depths, the same sick sweet odor from the night before, but stronger now, mixed with something else. Something that reminded me of a root cellar, damp earth and decay. I was frozen at the edge, staring into the abyss when I heard the sound. Not loud, not close, just low. Like breath behind thick glass, like something large inhaling and exhaling far below. It came from the hole, echoing off the stone walls, growing stronger as whatever was making it moved closer to the surface. I backed away slowly, my boots crunching on scattered bones. The sound followed me, growing louder, more insistent. And underneath it, I began to hear something else. Voices, faint but unmistakable, calling from the depths in languages I didn't recognize, pleading in tones that made my teeth ache. I should have run then, should have turned and sprinted back the way I came, but I couldn't look away from the hole. Something was moving down there, something large shifting in the darkness. The voices were getting louder, more desperate, and I realized they weren't speaking foreign languages. They were speaking English, but their mouths were wrong, their tongues twisted by pain and terror into sounds that barely resembled human speech. That's when I saw the first hand. White fingers gripping the stone edge, pulling something up from the depths. The fingers were too long, too thin, with joints that bent in impossible directions. They were followed by an arm, then a shoulder, then a head that was wrong in every way that mattered. It wasn't standing when it emerged. It was crouched, like it had been waiting. Its skin looked wet, glistening in the afternoon sun like something that had never seen daylight. Where its face should have been, there were only folds of skin, creased and wrinkled like old leather. Its arms were too long for its body, ending in those terrible hands that seemed to have too many fingers. Its legs bent the wrong way, jointed like a bird's, but supporting a body that was unmistakably humanoid. It didn't make a sound as it emerged fully from the hole, but I heard something anyway. A voice I recognized, but couldn't place. Words spoken in a tone that bypassed my ears and went straight to some primitive part of my brain that remembered older fears. It was like hearing my father's voice, but wrong, twisted, like it had borrowed the sound of someone I loved and corrupted it into something obscene. The thing tilted its head, and I raised my rifle. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold it steady. I'd killed hundreds of animals over the years, but this was different. This thing was looking at me with an intelligence that was clearly not animal. It was studying me, learning me, deciding what to do with me. I fired once. The shot echoed across the clearing like thunder. The bullet hit center mass, and I saw the impact, saw the thing stagger backward, but it didn't fall. It didn't bleed. It just moved faster than anything that size should have been able to move, like it skipped forward through space without crossing the distance between. Then it was behind me. I spun around, working the bolt action, chambering another round. But the thing was just standing there, close enough to touch. Up close, I could see that its skin wasn't wet with moisture. It was wet with something else, something that looked like tree sap, but moved like blood. The folds where its face should have been were opening and closing like gills, and I could see things moving underneath, things that might have been eyes, or might have been something worse. It reached out with one of those impossible hands and touched my shoulder. Just a gentle touch, almost tender. And suddenly I could see everything. The hole wasn't empty. It was full of them. Dozens of people, hundreds maybe, stacked like cordwood in the depths. Their eyes were open, staring upward, mouths moving in silent screams. They weren't dead. They were something worse than dead. They were conscious, aware, trapped in bodies that wouldn't obey them, buried alive but unable to die. I saw faces I recognized. Hunters who had disappeared over the years, hikers who had vanished on solo trips, a family from Minnesota who had been camping in the area 5 years ago. All of them down there, all of them aware, all of them screaming without sound. And I saw more. I saw the thing's history, its purpose. It was old, older than the mountains themselves. It had been here when the first humans crossed the land bridge from Asia, feeding on their children, their elderly, their weak. It had watched civilizations rise and fall, always patient, always hungry. The hole was its larder, its storage place. It kept its food fresh by keeping it alive, conscious, marinating in terror and despair. I saw my own future, saw myself joining the collection, my eyes open, but my body paralyzed, slowly dissolving over years or decades, while remaining horribly aware. I saw the thing wearing my face, using my voice to call other hunters into the woods. I saw it perfecting its mimicry, learning to be human just well enough to lure more prey. The vision lasted maybe seconds, but it felt like hours. When it ended, I was alone in the clearing. The thing was gone, but the hole remained, and I could still hear the voices calling from below. Weaker now, but persistent, begging for help that would never come. I don't remember getting away. I don't remember running or walking or crawling. I just remember waking up at the edge of the forest, 3 miles from where I'd parked my truck. The sun was setting, painting the mountains red and gold. My boots were gone. My feet were torn and bleeding, but I was alive. Somehow, impossibly, I was alive. My rifle was gone too. I'd dropped it somewhere in the clearing, or maybe the thing had taken it. My pack was missing, along with all my gear, but I had my wallet, my keys, my phone. The phone had no signal, but it still worked. I used its flashlight to examine my feet, bandaging the worst cuts with strips torn from my shirt. The walk back to my truck took 2 hours. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something following me. But the forest was quiet, normal. Birds were singing, insects were buzzing. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the ordinary sounds of evening in the mountains. My truck started on the first try. I drove home in a daze, not stopping for gas or food, just focused on getting as far from that place as possible. It was past midnight when I reached my house, and I spent the rest of the night sitting in my kitchen with the lights on, drinking coffee and trying to make sense of what had happened. But I couldn't make sense of it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hole. Every time I dozed off, I heard the voices. The smell lingered in my nostrils, that sick, sweet odor of old death and something worse. I showered 3 times, scrubbing my skin raw, but couldn't wash away the sensation of that thing's touch. I didn't sleep for 3 days. When I finally did, the dreams were worse than staying awake. I saw the clearing in perfect detail, saw the thing emerging from the hole, saw the faces of the trapped people below. In the dreams, I could understand what they were saying. They were begging me to help them. They were warning me about what was coming. A week later, I went to the sheriff's office, told them everything, or as much as I could without sounding completely insane. I said I'd gotten lost, that I'd found evidence of missing persons, that there might be something dangerous in the wilderness area. They listened politely, took notes, asked all the right questions. Then they told me what they'd found. Nothing. They'd sent a search and rescue team to the coordinates I'd given them, found the area where I'd camped, found evidence of my presence, but no clearing, no hole, no bones. The forest was intact, unmarked, exactly as it should have been. They suggested I might have been hypothermic, delusional from exposure and dehydration. It happens to solo hikers, they said. The mind plays tricks when you're stressed and alone. They recommended I see a doctor, maybe talk to someone about what I'd experienced. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd touched. And I knew it was still out there. I never went back to those mountains. Sold my rifles, gave away my hunting gear, found other hobbies. But it didn't matter. The thing had marked me somehow, left some invisible sign that I couldn't wash away. I still smell it sometimes, usually when it rains. Still hear the breathing in the silence between thunderclaps. Still see movement in my peripheral vision that disappears when I turn to look. And I know it's still out there, waiting, patient, hungry. Others have gone missing since then. A bow hunter from Idaho, a wildlife photographer from California, a family of hikers from Colorado, all in the same general area, all without a trace. The authorities blame it on the wilderness, on human error, on bad luck. But I know better. I know there are places in this world where the old things still live. Places where the maps are wrong, where the forests hide secrets that predate human civilization. Places where something patient and hungry waits for the next person to wander too far from the safety of roads and cell towers. The thing in the clearing is still there, still collecting, still growing its larder of living victims. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind is howling and the darkness seems absolute. I wonder if it's learned to be human well enough to walk among us. If it's perfected its mimicry enough to lure victims from cities and towns instead of waiting for them to come to the mountains. I wonder if it's reading this right now, learning from my words, understanding how to be more convincing the next time it needs to feed. If this case disturbed you, good. That means you're still human. Subscribe before the next file finds you. End file. Addendum case notes. Subject's psychological evaluation remains inconclusive. Physical evidence supports presence in wilderness area, but contradicts reported timeline. Satellite imagery shows no geological anomalies at provided coordinates. Recommend continued monitoring. Note: 7 additional disappearances in same region since initial report. Search patterns suggest coordinated effort, but no evidence of human involvement found. Classification remains Omega Black, pending further investigation.